A wealthy man, known for his coldness, sees his life crumble after a mistake that changes everything. Consumed by guilt, he abandons his reality and begins to live as a stranger. But a simple gesture connects him to a family that sees beyond his appearance. And this encounter awakens in him the chance to rebuild everything he had lost. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing, Rafael Almeida woke up every day at 5 in the morning. Not out of bodily need, but due to a discipline he had imposed on himself so many years ago that he no longer remembered why. The alarm clock didn't even need to ring. His eyes opened on their own, always a few minutes before the programmed alarm, as if even sleep had learned to obey his orders. He would get out of the king-size bed, cross the large and minimalist bedroom of the triplex apartment in the south zone of São Paulo, and go straight to the Italian marble bathroom. The routine was mathematical: a quick shower, a precision shave, a tailored suit chosen from dozens of identical options that occupied an entire closet. Everything was always in the right place, at the right time, with no room for the unexpected. Rafael was 42 years old and was considered one of the most successful businessmen in the country. His holding company controlled technology, logistics, and real estate investment firms. He sat on boards of directors, signed million-dollar contracts, and made decisions that affected the lives of thousands of employees. His name appeared frequently in business magazines, always accompanied by adjectives like visionary, strategic, and implacable. And that was exactly what he took pride in being: implacable, focused, free from distractions. Breakfast was served punctually at 5:45 by Donna Calia, the housekeeper who had worked for him for almost a decade. She prepared everything in silence. She knew every preference, every detail of her boss's routine. Black coffee without sugar, 2 slices of whole-grain bread, fresh fruit cut into uniform pieces. Rafael ate while reading financial reports on his tablet, barely looking up from the device. Donna Celia knew she shouldn't interrupt. Not that he was rude, but there was an invisible barrier she had learned to respect in her very first months of work. Rafael Almeida didn't like small talk, didn't ask questions about anyone's personal life, and didn't expect them to ask about his. At 6:30, the driver was already waiting in the building's garage. Rafael would get into the executive car, nod briefly, and dive back into the numbers and graphs that occupied his mind. The route to the office, located on Avenida Faria Lima, took about 30 minutes depending on traffic, but Rafael rarely looked out the window. He had no interest in watching the city wake up, the hurried workers on the sidewalks, the shops opening their doors. All of that was just scenery. What mattered was inside the spreadsheets, the contracts and the strategic meetings that would define the company's next move. The workday easily extended until 10, sometimes 11 at night. Meetings, video conferences with international partners, analysis of proposals, negotiation of mergers. Rafael commanded everything firmly, without hesitation. His team respected him, but they also feared him. He did not tolerate errors, did not accept excuses, and did not waste time with those who could not keep up with the pace he dictated. Some said he was fair, just demanding. Others whispered that he was too cold, incapable of seeing people beyond the results they delivered. The truth was that Rafael didn't care what people thought of him. Emotions, in his view, were dangerous distractions. He had learned this while still young, when he decided that nothing would stop him from reaching the top. Romantic relationships were brief and superficial. Friendships were practically non-existent. Even family ties had become rare and formal. His parents, still alive, lived in the interior of São Paulo and only saw him on holidays, when he would show up for a few hours before rushing back to the capital, always with the excuse of urgent commitments. His younger sister, Fernanda, tried to keep in touch, but the conversations were always short and punctuated by long, awkward silences. Rafael knew that Fernanda worried about him. She insisted on invitations to lunches, family parties, and casual get-togethers, but he always found a justification not to go. It wasn't out of ill will, or so he told himself. It was simply because he saw no point in spending time on matters that brought no return. And family, in his logic, brought no return. Only demands, expectations, and a series of complicated feelings he preferred to keep locked away somewhere far from his consciousness. There was a time when Raphael almost made room for something else. Almost. It was years ago when he met Mariana, an architect working on one of the company's projects. She was intelligent, independent, and full of her own ideas. For a few months, Raphael allowed it to become something more than just sporadic encounters. They had dinner together, talked about future plans, and even traveled to the coast for a long weekend. Mariana spoke about building something real, about balancing career and personal life, about the importance of not letting work consume everything. Raphael listened, but deep down he couldn't completely understand what she meant. To him, work didn't consume everything. Work was everything. The relationship ended predictably. Mariana grew tired of waiting for him to change, to prioritize her presence, to show genuine interest in something beyond numbers and strategies. Raphael didn't fight. He didn't try to convince her to stay. He simply accepted the end with the same coldness with which he accepted the closing of an unfavorable contract. He moved on. He returned to dedicating himself entirely to business. And over time, he convinced himself he had made the right choice. Years passed. Raphael accumulated more money, more properties, more power, but the triplex apartment remained empty, silent, impeccable. He arrived late every night, took a hot shower, checked his emails one last time before sleeping, and repeated the cycle the next day. Weekend was just a word on the calendar. He worked Saturdays and Sundays with the same intensity, often even more, taking advantage of the office's silence to plan long-term strategies. Donna Celia observed all of this with silent concern. She knew it wasn't her place to question her boss's choices, but she couldn't help feeling a deep sadness seeing such a capable, successful man living as if he were serving a sentence. Once she dared to comment that he needed to rest, that such a pace wasn't healthy. Raphael just smiled politely and changed the subject. She never brought it up again. It was on a Tuesday in August that everything began to fall apart. Raphael was in a crucial meeting with foreign investors. The negotiation involved millions of dollars and months of preparation. He was focused, presenting numbers, answering technical questions with the confidence of someone who mastered every detail of the project. His cell phone vibrated several times on the table, but he ignored it. It was no time for distractions. The meeting needed to be concluded. The contract needed to be closed. Everything else could wait. Everything. The calls continued. First the cell phone, then the office landline. His secretary entered the room discreetly and whispered something in his ear. Raphael made an impatient gesture, indicating he would deal with it later. She insisted, this time with an expression of urgency he wasn't used to seeing. He excused himself to the investors and left the room for a few minutes. On the other end of the line was Fernanda. Her voice was trembling, broken by sobs. Something had happened. Something serious. Raphael felt the ground slip from beneath his feet as he listened to his sister's words. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be true. But it was. And suddenly, all that perfect structure, all that controlled and planned life, seemed small and insignificant in the face of what he had just lost. He cancelled the meeting, left the investors waiting, and ignored the team's protests. For the first time in decades, Rafael Almeida dropped everything and ran. But it was already too late. What had happened could not be undone. And for the first time in his life, he understood that there are things that no planning, no strategy, and no amount of money in the world can control or recover. In the days that followed, Raphael could barely function. He attended the necessary commitments as if in a trance. He greeted people, listened to words of condolence, and did what needed to be done. But inside, something had broken. Guilt was a constant presence, heavy, suffocating. If only he had answered the phone sooner. If only he had paid attention to the warnings. If only he had been present instead of always being too busy, too distant, too cold. His sister tried to talk to him, but Raphael closed himself off completely. He couldn't look at her without feeling the pain multiply. Donna Celia prepared meals he wouldn't touch. The driver waited in the garage without receiving orders. The office called every day, but he wouldn't answer. Something inside him had given up. and for the first time, Rafael Almeida no longer knew what to do. Weeks turned into months, and Rafael began distancing himself from everything like someone letting themselves slowly sink. It wasn't a conscious decision, at least not at first. It was more like a gradual surrender, a silent resignation from continuing to sustain the life he had built. The triplex apartment, which had always been impeccable, began to accumulate dust. Donna Celia continued going to work every day, but she found her employer increasingly distant, locked in his room, not eating, not answering emails, not taking calls. She tried to talk, offered help, suggested he find someone to talk to about what he was feeling. Rafael only thanked her with a nod and closed himself off again. The office sent desperate messages. Important meetings were being cancelled, contracts were going unsigned, crucial decisions were being postponed indefinitely. The team didn't know what to do. Some tried going to the apartment, but Rafael wouldn't answer the door. Others called insistently, but the phone rang into a void. Fernanda was the only one who managed to get in. She had a copy of the key left years ago for emergencies. When she saw her brother's state, her heart tightened. Rafael was lying on the bed, wearing the same clothes for days, with an unshaven beard and empty eyes fixed on the ceiling. She tried to pull him back, to remind him that life went on, that he needed to react, but her words seemed not to reach where he was. Rafael only murmured apologies, said he needed time, that he couldn't go back to being who he was. Fernanda persisted for weeks. She brought food, tidied the apartment, tried to force some routine, but every time she left, Rafael returned to the same state. And then, in a moment of desperation and frustration, she said something she shouldn't have. She said he was being selfish, that he was drowning in self-pity, that he needed to honor the memory of what he had lost by moving forward, not by destroying himself that way. The words came out harsh and cutting. Rafael listened to everything in silence. By the time she realized her mistake and tried to retract, it was too late. Something in her brother's gaze had changed. He asked her to leave, and he did not allow her to return. It was from that point on that Rafael made the decision that would seal his fall. He didn't want that life anymore. He didn't want the apartment full of memories. He didn't want the money he could never use for what really mattered. He didn't want the responsibilities that now seemed empty and meaningless. He wanted to disappear, to vanish, to stop being Rafael Almeida, the successful businessman, and become nobody. He began to get rid of everything. He signed powers of attorney, giving unrestricted powers to his lawyers to manage the businesses. He transferred absurd amounts to accounts he would never access again. He donated clothes, furniture, personal objects. He left a letter for Donna Celia with an envelope full of money and a respectful farewell. He explained nothing. He only thanked her for the years of dedication and asked her not to try to look for him. Then he put on simple clothes, took only a small backpack with the bare essentials, and left the apartment without looking back. São Paulo swallowed him easily. Such a large, busy city had plenty of space for someone who didn't want to be found. Rafael began walking aimlessly, sleeping in public shelters, then in squares, under overpasses. The money he had taken with him was used sparingly, but he knew it would eventually run out, and when it did, he would simply continue there, in invisibility. People passed by him without looking. To most, he was just one more among the many the city had forgotten. Rafael asked for nothing, approached no one. He spent his days sitting on park benches, watching the movement, lost in thoughts that consumed him from within. The guilt remained present, but now it was accompanied by a strange kind of peace, the peace of someone who had given up the fight. While Rafael dissolved into the streets of the south zone of São Paulo, in a more distant neighborhood in the east zone of the city, a woman named Marina Costa woke up every day at 5:30 in the morning with a completely different purpose. She didn't wake up out of empty discipline or an obsession with work. She woke up because two 7-year-old girls depended on her for everything. Marina was 34 years old and worked as a cook in a popular restaurant in the Tatuapé region. The salary was modest, but it was enough to pay the rent for the simple house where she lived with her twin daughters, Sophia and Helena. The house had 2 small bedrooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen, and a tiny bathroom. It wasn't much, but Marina cared for every corner with affection, kept everything clean and organized, and decorated the walls with drawings the girls made at school. The twins were the center of Marina's life. They had been born at a difficult time, when Marina was still married to Daniel, a man she met young and believed would be her companion forever. But Daniel couldn't handle the responsibility of being a father. When the girls were only 1 year old, he left, leaving Marina alone with 2 children to raise. She never knew exactly where he had gone. He simply vanished, stopped sending news, and abandoned any link with the family he had formed. In the beginning, Marina fell into despair. She had no close family to help. Her parents had passed away years before, and she was an only child, but something inside her refused to give up. She found strength she didn't even know she had, accepted heavy labor, asked neighbors for help watching the girls while she worked, and gradually built a routine that, though exhausting, worked. Sophia and Helena were physically identical twins, but anyone who spent a few minutes with them realized they were completely different. Sophia was expansive, curious, and full of energy. She talked non-stop, asked 1,000 questions about everything, and loved to explore, run, and play in the street with the neighbors. She had a loud, infectious laugh and knew no shyness. Helena, on the other hand, was the opposite: quiet, observant, sensitive. She liked to stay inside the house drawing, making up stories, looking out the window, and commenting on the things she saw. She was more cautious, more reserved, but she had an impressive ability to notice details that went unnoticed by others. Marina loved them both with the same intensity, but in different ways. With Sophia, she needed constant energy to keep up with the fast pace and stay alert so she wouldn't get into trouble. With Helena, she needed patience to listen carefully to delicate observations and respect the moments of silence. The two completed each other, and together they formed the balance that kept Marina firm, even on the most difficult days. The household routine was demanding. Marina woke up early, prepared the girls' breakfast, packed their backpacks, and took them to the school located 3 blocks from home. Then, she took 2 buses to the restaurant where she worked. She spent the entire day in the kitchen, preparing meals for hundreds of people, returning home in the late afternoon exhausted, but always ready to hear how her daughter's day had been. The girls told her everything. Sophia talked about the games at recess, about the teacher who was nice, about the classmate who had brought a new toy. Helena talked about the drawing she had made, about the story the teacher had read, about the cloud she had seen through the classroom window that looked like a cat. Marina listened to it all, asked questions, and participated in that small world full of meaning. The nights were the most special moment. After the simple dinner Marina prepared with whatever was in the fridge, the 3 would sit on the old living room sofa. Sometimes they watched a program on the small television. Other times, Marina told stories she made up on the spot. Stories about brave princesses, talking animals, and adventures in distant places. Sophia always asked for action stories with challenges and overcoming. Helena preferred calmer stories about friendships and discoveries. Marina didn't have much to offer in material terms. She couldn't buy expensive toys, brand-name clothes, or elaborate outings, but she offered something that no amount of money could buy. She offered presence. She offered a listening ear. She offered unconditional love and a sense of security that made the girls know that no matter what happened, their mother would always be there. There were difficult moments, of course. Months when the money wasn't enough for everything, when Marina had to choose between paying a bill or buying medicine. Nights when she cried silently in her room, worried about the future, afraid of not being able to give her daughters everything they deserved. But in the morning she dried her tears, put a smile on her face, and moved forward. Because giving up was not an option, not when 2 girls depended on her for everything. Sophia and Helena noticed their mother's effort, even being so small. They knew Marina worked hard, that she got tired, that sometimes she had difficulties, and because of that, each in her own way tried to help. Sophia organized the toys without complaining, helped set the table, and cheered her mother up with her games. Helena drew little cards saying she loved her mother, stayed quiet when she saw Marina needed a moment of peace, and observed everything with that attentive and affectionate gaze. It was on a sunny afternoon in October that destiny began to weave these 2 very distant stories together. Marina had left work early to take the girls to the doctor for a routine checkup. The office was in a nearby neighborhood, but it still required a walk to the bus stop and then a few more blocks. The girls were excited, Sophia skipping and humming, Helena holding firmly to her mother's hand. They passed through a busy square, full of people coming and going. Marina held Helena by her right hand, and Sophia walked on the left side, a little ahead. That was when it happened. Sophia, distracted by looking at a dog on the other side of the street, stepped forward without noticing the car coming at high speed. Marina screamed her daughter's name, but she was too far away to reach her in time. That was when a firm hand grabbed Sophia by the arm and pulled her back to the sidewalk with enough force to prevent the worst. The car brushed past, the driver honked angrily and kept going. Sophia was terrified, her eyes wide. Marina ran to her, hugged her tightly, her heart racing. When she finally managed to breathe again, she looked to see who had saved her daughter. It was a man of neglected appearance, with a large beard, old and dirty clothes, but with eyes that still held something she couldn't quite identify. He released Sophia's arm carefully, took a step back, and made a simple gesture with his head, as if to say it was nothing. Before Marina could properly thank him, he was already moving away, walking toward the other side of the square. Sophia, still trembling, grabbed her mother's hand. Helena, who had observed everything in silence, stared fixedly at the retreating man. And at that moment, without anyone knowing it yet, something important had just begun. Raphael no longer counted the days. Time had lost its meaning. He woke up when the sun rose, walked the city streets until he was tired, and looked for a place to rest when night fell. He didn't talk to anyone, made no plans, didn't think about tomorrow. He lived in a kind of limbo, present only physically, but absent from everything else. People passed him by without looking, hurried in their own lives, and that was exactly what he wanted. To be invisible. To not exist. On that Thursday morning, Raphael was sitting on a bench near a busy avenue, watching the coming and going of cars without really paying attention. His stomach growled with hunger, but he had learned to ignore it. Later, perhaps he would find something, or perhaps not. It didn't matter. He was there in that state of total disconnection when he heard children's voices approaching. Two girls were walking along the sidewalk, talking animatedly. One of them, the more talkative one, gestured as she told something about art class at school. The other, quieter, listened attentively with a small smile on her face. They seemed to be about 7 years old, wore school uniforms and carried colorful backpacks on their backs. Raphael looked away. Children bothered him, not because he didn't like them, but because they awakened a pain in him that he preferred to keep buried. The girls passed him without noticing his presence and continued walking. The quieter one, Helena, suddenly stopped, leaned down, and picked something up from the ground. It was a 1 real coin, shining under the sunlight. She excitedly showed it to her sister, who immediately suggested they buy a lollipop at the corner shop. Helena nodded, put the coin in her pocket, and started walking again. That was when it happened. A small dog without a collar came running across the sidewalk from a side alley. Helena, with that instinct children have to run after animals, immediately went after it without looking sideways. The dog dashed toward the street. Helena followed it. And at that exact moment, a car was coming at high speed down the avenue. Everything happened in a matter of seconds, but for Raphael it was as if time slowed down. He saw the girl running, saw the car approaching, and saw that the driver wouldn't have time to brake. His body reacted before his mind processed it. Raphael stood up from the bench and ran with a speed he didn't know he still possessed. His arms reached out, grabbed Helena by the waist, and pulled her back to the sidewalk with force, both falling to the ground. The car passed inches from them, honking furiously. The driver shouted something out the window but didn't stop. Helena remained paralyzed on the ground, eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. Sophia, who had witnessed everything from the sidewalk, ran to her sister screaming. Raphael stood up quickly and checked if the girl was okay. She had a scratch on her knee where it had scraped the asphalt during the fall, but nothing serious. Sophia held her sister's hand, trembling, repeating her name several times. Some people approached, asking if everything was okay, if they needed to call anyone. Raphael just shook his head, took a step back, and began to walk away. Helena, still sitting on the ground, looked at him with those deep, curious eyes. She said nothing, just observed. Sophia also looked, but unlike her sister, she spoke. Her voice trembled a little, but it was clear. "You saved my sister." Raphael didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. He simply continued moving away, losing himself among the people on the sidewalk. His heart beat fast, not just from the physical effort, but from something he couldn't name. For a few seconds, he had felt something beyond the void, a purpose, even if momentary, and that scared him more than anything else. The twins stayed where they were until Donna Teresa, who picked them up from school every day, appeared in a hurry. She had seen the scene from afar and was running, worried. Hearing the girls' account, she turned pale, hugged them both tightly, and thanked the heavens that nothing more serious had happened. She examined Helena's knee, cleaned the wound with a wet wipe she carried in her bag, and took the two home, promising to tell Marina everything as soon as she arrived. When Marina arrived from work that night and heard Donna Teresa's account, she felt her legs go weak. She hugged her daughters so tightly that the girls complained they couldn't breathe. Marina kissed each one's face several times, checked Helena's knee, and then asked 1,000 questions about the man who had saved her daughter. But the girls knew little. A man, they said, with a big beard, old clothes, who was sitting on a bench and ran very fast. They said nothing more because he left without speaking. Marina thanked God, thanked Donna Teresa for taking care of the girls, and spent the entire night holding the twins, unable to stop thinking about how close she had come to losing one of them. Helena, who was usually more reserved, stayed glued to her mother all night, as if she needed to feel that warmth and security. Sophia, on the other hand, wouldn't stop talking about the brave man who appeared out of nowhere. "He was so fast, Mom. It looked like he was flying." Marina smiled, wiped away the tears that insisted on falling, and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Whoever he is an angel." The following days were normal. Routine returned to its usual rhythm. Marina worked, the girls went to school, everything seemed to have returned to its place. But Helena couldn't stop thinking about that man. She saw his face when she closed her eyes. Not with fear, but with curiosity. There was something in that look of his, something sad and lost, that she didn't completely understand, but that touched her in some way. The following Saturday, Marina took the twins to spend the afternoon at the neighborhood park. It was a sunny day, and the girls were excited. They bought popsicles from a street vendor and then went to play at the playground. Marina sat on a nearby bench, taking advantage of those rare minutes of rest, just to watch her daughters having fun. Sophia was on the swing, swinging higher and higher and laughing. Helena had found a kitten near the bushes and was crouching down, trying to pet it. Marina smiled, feeling a peace that only those simple moments could bring. Then Helena raised her head, looked to the other side of the park and became completely still. "Mom," she called, still staring fixedly at a distant point. Marina turned her head in the direction her daughter was pointing. On the other side of the park, near a large tree, there was a bench, and on that bench a man was sleeping. He was lying on his side, using his own hands as a pillow. Dirty clothes, an unshaven beard, a completely neglected appearance. Sophia got off the swing and ran to where her sister was. She looked in the same direction, and her eyes widened. "It's him, Mom. It's the man who saved Helena." Marina frowned, trying to understand. She looked again at the sleeping man. It didn't seem possible. That man clearly lived on the streets. How could he be the same person who had saved her daughter? "Are you sure?" Marina asked, still doubting. The two girls nodded at the same time, with that absolute certainty that only children have. "It's him, Mom, we remember." Helena took a few steps toward the bench, but Marina held her by the arm. "Wait, daughter. You can't just go around approaching people you don't know." "But we know him, Mom. He saved my life." Marina looked at the man again. He continued sleeping, oblivious to everything. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to take the girls and leave, move on with life, forget it. But another part, the part that had been raised to be grateful, to recognize goodness when she saw it, couldn't simply ignore it. The twins continued looking at the man with that expression of someone who had just found something important. Sophia pulled her mother's hand. "We need to help him, Mom. He helped us." Marina took a deep breath. She looked at her daughters, looked at the sleeping man, looked at the sky as if seeking an answer. She knew that wasn't sensible. She knew she could barely take care of her own family, that she had no extra resources, that opening the door to a stranger could be dangerous. But she also knew her daughters were right. That man, whoever he was, had saved Helena's life. And that meant something. She stood there still, watching the man sleep on that park bench, while her mind fought a battle between prudence and gratitude. The twins waited in silence, as if they knew that was an important moment. And in some way it was. That moment would define much more than Marina could imagine. It would define the beginning of a transformation that would change everyone's lives in ways none of them could predict. Marina closed her eyes for a moment, thought about everything she had gone through in life, all the times she had needed help, and someone had reached out. She thought of Donna Lourdes, of Donna Teresa, of all the people who had been essential for her to raise her daughters alone, and then she made a decision. "Let's go talk to him," she said softly. The girls smiled, and together the three walked slowly toward the bench where Rafael Almeida, a man who had once had everything and now had nothing, slept a restless sleep, unaware that this encounter would change the course of his story forever. Rafael woke up with the feeling that someone was watching him. He opened his eyes slowly, still confused, and saw 3 faces looking at him, 2 children and a woman. He sat up quickly on the bench, startled, trying to understand what was happening. His first instinct was to move away, but something in their expression made him stop. The woman took a step forward. She was young, must have been in her early 30s, with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail, modest but clean clothes. Her face had an expression that was at once firm and gentle. She looked at him attentively, without the disgust or fear that Raphael had become accustomed to seeing in people's eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice calm. Raphael passed his hand over his face, feeling the grown beard, the accumulated dirt. He knew what he must look like. He knew he had nothing to offer as an answer beyond a vague nod of the head. He wanted them to leave. He wanted to go back to sleep. He wanted to remain invisible. But the quieter girl, the one with deep eyes, took a step forward and spoke softly. "You saved me." Raphael looked at her, confused at first, but then the memory returned. The car, the run, the scare. He looked away, uncomfortable with the gratitude he saw in those childish eyes. "It was nothing," he murmured, his voice hoarse from not using it for days. "It was not nothing," the other girl intervened, the more talkative one. "You were very brave. My mum said you are an angel." Raphael almost laughed, but the sound that came out was more like a bitter sigh. Angel. He was far from being anything like an angel, but he said nothing. He just sat there, waiting for them to get tired and leave. Marina observed the man carefully. Even under the dirt, the beard, the neglected appearance, she could see that he wasn't just another homeless person. There was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he sat, how he held his hands, how he avoided her gaze. There was a story there, she was sure, a story that had led him to that bench. "My name is Marina," she said. "These are my daughters, Sophia and Helena. Helena is the one you saved." Raphael just nodded without saying his own name. Marina waited a few seconds, but realizing he wasn't going to introduce himself, she continued. "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did was very important. We don't have much, but I would like to offer a meal. Have you had lunch today?" The question caught Raphael by surprise. "Have you had lunch?" As if there were schedules, routines, normalcy. He shook his head negatively. "Then come have lunch with us, please. It's the least I can do." Raphael looked at her as if she had said something absurd. Lunch, with them, in a house. He couldn't, he didn't deserve it, it made no sense. "Oh, you don't need to," he said, his voice still hoarse. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," Helena said, approaching a little closer. "You saved me. I could have gotten very hurt." Marina saw the hesitation in his gaze. She also saw the shame, the discomfort. She understood it wouldn't be easy to convince him. But she had learned throughout life that sometimes it was necessary to insist on kindness, especially with those who needed it most. "Look," she said, changing her approach, "I'm not asking for anything in return. I just want to offer a plate of food. You don't need to feel embarrassed. No one needs to know anything. Just a meal and that's it." Raphael looked at the ground, his shoulders tense. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to send them all away and go back to being invisible. But at the same time, a deep and forgotten part of him yearned for what she offered. Not just the food, but the simple humanity of the gesture. It had been so long since someone had treated him like a person. "All right," he said finally, his voice almost inaudible. The girls smiled. Marina reached out her hand, but Raphael didn't take it. He just stood up, staggering a little from the stiffness of his joints. They walked in silence to the apartment, which was a few blocks away. Raphael followed a few steps behind, as if he could still turn back at any moment. When they arrived at the small 3-story building, Marina went up the stairs to the second floor and opened the apartment door. The space was modest, a small living room with a worn sofa, an old television, some picture frames on the walls. The kitchen was integrated, separated only by a low counter. You could see a narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. "You can sit," Marina said, pointing to the kitchen table. "I'm going to heat up the food." Raphael sat down carefully, as if he were afraid of breaking something. The twins stayed watching him, curious but without fear. Sophia pulled up a chair and sat next to him. "What's your name?" she asked. Raphael hesitated. It had been so long since he had said his own name that it felt strange to pronounce it. "Raphael," he finally said. "Nice to meet you, Raphael. I'm Sophia and she's Helena. We're twins, but we're not the same." Raphael sketched something that almost looked like a smile. The girl spoke with such naturalness, such sincerity, that it was impossible not to be touched by it. Marina served a generous plate of rice, beans, shredded chicken, and salad. She placed it in front of Raphael along with a glass of juice. He looked at the food as if he didn't believe it was real. How long had it been since he had eaten a real meal? Weeks, maybe months. "Eat," Marina said gently. "You don't need to be ashamed." Raphael picked up the fork with trembling hands and began to eat. Slowly at first, but soon hunger spoke louder. He ate everything, cleaned the plate completely. Marina served more, without asking. He ate again. When he finally stopped, he felt almost human again. The girls ate too, talking about school, about friends, about mundane things that filled that space with a normalcy Raphael had forgotten existed. Marina participated in the conversation, but every now and then she cast discreet glances at him, as if trying to understand who that man sitting at her table was. After lunch, Marina prepared coffee. Raphael accepted a cup and sat there holding the hot liquid between his hands, absorbing the warmth. The girls went to the bedroom to play, leaving the two adults alone in the kitchen. Marina sat across from him, her hands also around a cup of coffee. They remained in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was almost respectful, as if both knew there were things that didn't need to be said yet. "Do you have a place to stay?" Marina finally asked. Raphael shook his head negatively. "Family." Another negative nod. Technically, it was a lie. He had family, but for all intents and purposes he had disappeared. He no longer deserved to be considered part of anything. Marina took a deep breath, as if she were making a difficult decision. "Look, I know we barely know each other, and I know this will seem crazy, but you saved my daughter, and I can't simply let you go back to the street knowing that." Raphael looked up, surprised. "I have a sofa here in the living room. It's nothing luxurious, but it's better than a park bench. You can stay for a few days until you recover a little." "No," Raphael said immediately. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I don't deserve it." The answer came out before he could think. Marina remained in silence, looking at him with an expression that mixed understanding and firmness. "I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what story led you here. But I know no one deserves to live on the street. No one deserves to go hungry or cold. And I know that anyone who runs to save a child they don't even know has something good inside them, no matter what happened in the past." Raphael felt something break inside his chest. How long had it been since someone spoke to him like that? How long had it been since someone saw in him something beyond a failure? "I have very little," Marina continued, "but what I have I can share. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm just offering a chance to rest, to eat properly, to think about what comes next. Do you accept?" Raphael looked around. The apartment was simple, humble, but there was something in it that had been missing for a long time. There was life. There was human warmth. There was dignity. He didn't know if he deserved it. He probably didn't. But he was so tired of carrying the weight of guilt alone, so exhausted from living like a ghost, that he didn't have the strength to refuse again. "All right," he said softly, "but just for a few days." Marina smiled. It was a small but genuine smile. A few days then. She stood up, took clean towels from a cupboard and handed them to him. The bathroom is there. You can take a shower if you want. There should be some clothes from my ex-husband that he forgot here. They're nothing special, but they're clean. Raphael took the towels, feeling the weight of that simple gesture. When was the last time someone had offered him something without expecting anything in return? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen a person, not a problem? He entered the small bathroom, closed the door and stood there for a few minutes, looking at his own reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized himself. Sunken eyes, an unshaven beard, marked skin. Who was that man? What was left of Rafael Almeida? He turned on the shower and let the hot water fall over his body. He stayed there for a long time, letting the dirt of the streets run down the drain, along with something else he couldn't name. Maybe it was a bit of the shame, maybe it was a bit of the pain, or maybe it was just the beginning of a silent permission to exist again. When he came out of the shower, wearing the clean clothes Marina had left outside the door, he felt strange, almost human again. He returned to the living room and found Marina arranging pillows and a blanket on the sofa. "The girls are already asleep," she said. "Tomorrow is Sunday, so we can be more relaxed. You need to rest." Raphael just nodded. He lay down on the sofa and felt his body sink into the soft surface. It was uncomfortable because it was so comfortable. He had grown used to hard benches, cold sidewalks. That seemed too luxurious. Marina turned off the lights and went to her room. Raphael stayed there in the dark, looking at the ceiling. He could hear the sounds of the apartment, the clock on the wall, the refrigerator turning on, the quiet breathing of the girls in the next room. Sounds of a normal life, of a family, of a home, and for the first time in a long time, Rafael Almeida didn't want to disappear. He didn't want to go back to the void. He just wanted to stay there, in that simple little apartment, surrounded by a kindness he didn't completely understand, but accepted because he no longer had the strength to fight against it. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in months, slept deeply. The first few days were strange for everyone. Raphael woke up early, even before Marina, and sat on the sofa not knowing what to do. He wasn't used to being in a home, having a routine, living with people. When Marina came out to the bathroom and found him there, already awake, she just nodded and followed her morning routine. She didn't ask invasive questions, didn't demand anything. She just let him exist in that space. The twins, on the other hand, didn't have the same caution as the adults. To them, Raphael was simply someone new in the house, someone interesting to talk to. Sophia was the most uninhibited. She would sit next to him on the sofa and start talking about whatever came to mind. She told stories about school, friends, games. Raphael listened in silence, but gradually, without realizing it, he began to ask small questions. What was her teacher like? What did she like to play most? Sophia answered excitedly, happy to have someone paying attention. Helena was more subtle. She didn't talk as much, but she observed everything. She sat on the floor near the sofa and drew in an old notebook, every now and then looking up at Raphael. One day, she held out the notebook to him, showing a colorful drawing of a house with 3 people in front, a woman, 2 girls, and a man. "It's our house," she simply said. "Now you're in it too." Raphael looked at the drawing, feeling something tighten in his chest. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to process such a natural, unconditional inclusion. He just handed back the notebook and murmured a thank you that barely left his throat. Marina observed these interactions with a mix of tenderness and caution. She didn't know much about that man. She didn't know where he came from, what had happened to put him on the streets. But she saw the way he treated the girls, with delicacy, with respect, and that was enough for now. She also saw how he avoided looking her in the eye, how he carried a heavy shame that showed in every gesture. She understood that. She had gone through difficult times in her own life. She knew what it was to carry guilt and shame. One morning, while Marina was preparing coffee, Raphael got up from the sofa and went to the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, not knowing if he should approach, but then asked softly if he could help. Marina looked at him, surprised, but soon smiled. "Can you wash those fruits there? I'm going to make a smoothie for the girls." Raphael took the fruits and began washing them carefully. It was a simple task, but it had been so long since he had done anything useful that it seemed very significant. Marina noticed his concentration on that basic gesture and felt a pang of sadness. What kind of pain had led that man to give up on everything? As the days passed, Raphael began to help more. He made the sofa where he slept every morning, folding the blanket with military precision. He washed the dishes after meals. He swept the living room when he saw it was dirty. He didn't make a fuss, didn't ask for recognition. He just did it as if he needed to feel useful in some way. One Saturday afternoon, while Marina was in the bedroom organizing clothes, she heard a sound coming from the living room. It was Raphael talking to the girls. His voice, which was usually low and hesitant, sounded different. He was explaining something about math to Sophia, who had difficulty with her homework. Marina stood in the hallway listening. "Think of it this way," Raphael was saying. "If you have 10 candies and share them with your sister, how many does each one get?" 5, Sophia answered. "That's right. And if another friend arrives and you want to share equally?" 3 each." "Almost, you are 3 people. What is 10 divided by 3? Sophia fell silent, thinking. Raphael took a piece of paper and began drawing small circles, explaining patiently. Marina realized he wasn't just helping with the homework. He was truly teaching, with method and clarity. There was something there that revealed an education, a capability one wouldn't expect from someone living on the streets. Later, when the girls went to play in the room, Marina sat next to Raphael. "You're good with numbers," she commented. Raphael shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I used to work with that a long time ago." Marina waited, giving him space to continue if he wanted, but Raphael just remained in silence, looking at his own hands. "You know," Marina said gently, "whatever happened in the past, it doesn't define who you are now. We can always start over." Raphael laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "Start over. It's easy to say, it's hard to believe that's possible." Marina took a deep breath. She understood that feeling more than he could imagine. "I also once thought I wouldn't be able to start over. When the girl's father left, I thought everything was over. I had no money, no support. I had 2 small children depending on me. But you know what I learned? That we are stronger than we imagine, and that sometimes starting over isn't about having a perfect plan. It's about taking one step at a time." Raphael looked at her for the first time with attention. He saw in Marina's eyes a strength he recognized, but also a goodness that disconcerted him. She had gone through difficulties, that was obvious, but there was no bitterness in her, only determination. "I ruined everything," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could control them. "Everything that mattered, I lost. And it was my fault. I was so focused on the wrong things that I failed to see what really had value. And when I realized it, it was already too late." His voice trembled at the end. Marina saw the tears forming in his eyes and, without thinking, reached out and touched his arm lightly. "I don't know what happened, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But I know that staying stuck in the past, punishing yourself eternally, isn't going to change anything that has already happened. The only thing you can do now is choose how you're going to live from here on out." Raphael wiped his eyes quickly, ashamed of having opened up like that. But at the same time, he felt a strange relief. It had been so long since he had talked about it, since he had admitted out loud the guilt he carried. In the days that followed, something began to change almost imperceptibly. Raphael remained quiet and reserved, but there was a different lightness in him. He smiled slightly when Sophia told a bad joke. He helped Helena choose colors for her drawings. He talked with Marina about simple everyday matters, without so much discomfort. One night, after the girls fell asleep, Marina and Raphael stayed in the living room talking. She told him about the dreams she had when she was younger, about the desire to study pedagogy and work with children in a more significant way. But life had led her down other paths, and those dreams remained stored somewhere distant. "It's never too late," Raphael said. "You can still chase after that." Marina laughed. "With what time? With what money? I barely managed to pay the monthly bills." Raphael remained in silence, thoughtful. He knew he had resources. He had an entire life stored in bank accounts he had abandoned, but he also knew he wasn't ready to go back to that. Not yet. maybe never. But the seed was planted. The idea that perhaps he could do something good, something that wasn't just about him, began to germinate in his mind. One morning, Raphael woke up before the sun rose and stood looking out the living room window. The city was beginning to wake up. Hurried workers walked to the bus stop. Shops opened their doors. Life followed its course, indifferent to each person's personal tragedies. He thought about how much time he had spent invisible in that same city, sleeping in squares, wandering aimlessly. And now here he was, inside a house, surrounded by people who cared, even without knowing his whole story. For the first time in a long time, Raphael allowed himself to think about the future. Not a distant and grandiose future, but a near future. Maybe he could stay a few more days. Maybe he could help Marina in some way. Maybe he could resume contact with the world he had left behind, not to go back to being who he was, but to use what he had in a different way. He looked at the sofa where he slept, at the photographs on the wall showing Marina and the twins in happy moments, at the toys scattered on the floor. That was so different from everything he knew. So simple. So real. And for the first time, instead of feeling he didn't deserve to be there, Raphael felt gratitude. Marina appeared in the living room, still in pajamas, yawning. "Already awake?" she asked. Raphael nodded. "I couldn't sleep anymore." Marina went to the kitchen and began preparing coffee. Raphael followed her, and without needing to ask, began to help. They worked in silent synchrony, each knowing what to do. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the table and stayed there, in a comfortable silence, just enjoying that moment of peace. The girls woke up soon after, bringing with them the energy and joy that only children can have early in the morning. Sophia jumped onto Raphael's lap, almost making him spill his coffee. Helena sat next to her mother and began drawing on a napkin. "Today is Sunday," Sophia announced. "We're going to the park, right, Mom?" Marina looked at Raphael, as if asking if he would like to go along. He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "We can go," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Raphael Almeida prepared to leave the house not as someone fleeing, but as someone who was part of something, as someone who belonged. And that, more than any money or success he ever had, seemed to be what he had been looking for his whole life, without knowing it. The weeks that followed brought changes that none of them could have predicted. Raphael continued living on the living room sofa, but now it didn't seem temporary. It had become part of the routine, part of that improvised family that destiny had brought together in such an unexpected way. He woke up early, helped Marina with breakfast, and took the twins to school when she needed to leave earlier for work. Small things, but they made all the difference. One morning, while Marina was preparing to leave, Raphael called her into the living room. He was sitting on the sofa with a serious expression on his face. Marina sat next to him, worried. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low but firm. Marina just nodded, giving him space to speak at his own pace. "My full name is Raphael Almeida. I was a businessman. I had a holding company, a lot of money, a life that anyone would consider successful. But I was empty inside. I only thought about work, numbers, goals. I set aside everything that mattered. My family tried to warn me several times, but I never listened." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "My mother got sick. Nothing serious at first, but she needed attention, medical follow-up. My sister called me several times asking me to visit her, to take her to appointments, to be present. But I always had an important meeting, a contract to close, a business trip. I always thought I would have time later." His voice began to fail. Marina took his hand, squeezing it lightly, encouraging him to continue. "One day I was in a crucial meeting. My cell phone rang several times. It was my sister. I ignored it. When I finally answered, it was too late. My mother had suffered a complication and needed urgent help. I cancelled everything and ran, but when I got to the hospital, she was already gone. The last words she said were asking for me, and I wasn't there." Tears were flowing freely down Raphael's face now. Marina felt her own eyes well up. "I couldn't forgive myself. I had so much money, so much success, but when it really mattered, I was worth nothing. I abandoned everything. The apartment, the company, the whole life. I thought I deserved to suffer, that I deserved to be on the streets. It was my way of punishing myself." Marina hugged him, letting him cry on her shoulder. They stayed like that for long minutes until Raphael calmed down. "I'm so sorry for what happened," Marina said softly. "But you can't punish yourself forever. Your mother wouldn't want that. She would want you to live, to be happy." "I know," Raphael murmured. "And being here with you made me understand that. It made me see that there is still a chance to do things differently, to be different." Marina pulled back a little to look him in the eye. "And what do you want to do now?" Raphael took a deep breath. "I want to take back my life, but not the way it was before. I want to do something that has meaning, and I want to start by helping you." Marina frowned, confused. "Helping me how?" "You said you dreamed of studying pedagogy, of working with children. I have resources. I can pay for your studies. I can help with expenses while you study. It's not charity. It's gratitude for everything you did for me." Marina shook her head, moved but hesitant. "Raphael, I can't accept that. It's too much." "Please," he insisted, "let me do this. Let me use what I have in a way that really matters. You gave me something that no amount of money can buy. You gave me dignity, purpose, a reason to want to live again. Let me repay you in the only way I know how." Marina looked at him for a long moment. She saw the sincerity in those eyes that were once so empty and now shone with determination. She thought of all the times she had given up on her own dreams for lack of options, for lack of opportunity. And now there was a chance to start over. "All right," she said finally, "but on one condition. You also need to take back your life. You can't stay hidden forever. You need to make peace with your family, with your past." Raphael nodded. "I know, and I will do that. It's time." In the following days, Raphael began taking the first steps. He called Fernanda, his sister. The conversation was difficult, full of tears and apologies. Fernanda was relieved he was alive, that he was well. She didn't judge him, didn't condemn him. She only said she missed him and that she wanted her brother back. They scheduled a meeting for the following week. Raphael also got in touch with his lawyers, with his team. He discovered that the company had been kept running by the partners who were waiting for his return. He wouldn't return as before, he decided. He would delegate more, trust his team, and use part of the profits for social projects. He wanted to create an institute that helped people in street situations, offering not just shelter, but real fresh starts. Marina, in turn, enrolled in the pedagogy college. She got a partial scholarship, and Raphael covered the rest. She would have to balance it with work at the hospital. It would be demanding, but for the first time in years, she felt she was walking toward her own dreams. The twins observed everything with that silent wisdom only children have. They saw Raphael smiling more, seeing their mother excited with her college books, and they realized that something beautiful had been born from that casual meeting in the square. One Sunday, they all went to the park together. Raphael bought popcorn for the girls, and they sat on the grass watching other families playing. Sophia ran after pigeons, laughing loudly. Helena drew flowers in a new notebook Raphael had given as a gift. Marina looked at Raphael and smiled. Who would have thought, right, that life would take this whole turn? Raphael nodded his head, thoughtful. I spent so much time thinking I knew what was important. I built an empire, accumulated wealth, but I was completely lost. And it was 2 children and a woman with almost nothing who showed me what really is worth it. We also learned, Marina said. The girls learned that a small gesture of kindness can change everything, and I learned that it's never too late to start over, to accept help, to trust. Raphael looked at the twins, playing without a care in the world, and felt a wave of affection he hadn't felt in a long time. Those children, with their innocence and generosity, had been his guardian angels without even knowing it. A few weeks later, Raphael finally moved off the sofa. He rented a nearby apartment, not as luxurious as the one he had before, but comfortable and welcoming. But he remained present. He took the girls to school, had dinner with them several times a week, and helped Marina with her college assignments. The bond between them had transformed into something deep and true. It wasn't just gratitude, it was respect, it was affection. It was a chosen family that destiny had joined in the most improbable way possible. Raphael also kept his promise. He met with Fernanda, and for the first time in a long time they truly talked. He apologized for everything, for having distanced himself, for not having been the brother she deserved. Fernanda hugged him and said that the important thing was that he was back. Together they visited their mother's grave. Raphael stood there in silence, saying everything he hadn't said in life. He promised he would be different, that he would honor her memory by being a better person, and he kept it. The institute he created began operating a few months later. It offered not just temporary shelter, but vocational courses, psychological support, and help reconnecting people with their families. Raphael visited the place regularly, talked with those being assisted, and listened to their stories. Every person he helped was a way of giving meaning to his own journey. Marina graduated in pedagogy 4 years later, in a moving ceremony where Raphael and the twins, now pre-teens, were in the front row applauding. She got a job in a public school, doing exactly what she always dreamed of, working with children who needed someone to believe in them. Sophia and Helena grew up watching that story of transformation. They learned that kindness is not weakness, that second chances exist, and that sometimes the most important people enter our lives in the most unexpected ways. On a December night, everyone was gathered at Raphael's apartment to celebrate Christmas. The table was full. Laughter filled the room, and there was a peace that only true love can bring. Raphael looked around, at Marina talking excitedly about a project at school, at Sophia and Helena putting together a puzzle together, and felt immense gratitude. He had lost so much. He had made irreparable mistakes, but he had also learned that it is possible to get up even after falling so low, that it is possible to forgive oneself, that it is possible to rebuild. And most importantly, he had learned that the true value of a life is not in how much one accumulates, but in how much one shares. It is not in how many individual achievements one reaches, but in how many lives one touches in a positive way. Rafael Almeida would never be the same person he was before, and that was good, because the person he became was infinitely better. He was more human, more present, more grateful. He was someone who understood that belonging to something greater than oneself was the greatest wealth someone could have. And all of that had started with a lost man sleeping on a park bench, and 2 girls who refused to let him remain invisible, who saw in him not a stranger, but a human being who deserved a second chance. And by giving him that chance, they ended up giving him much more than they imagined. They gave him back his own life. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Raphael and Marina touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of starting over, of forgiveness, and of transformation, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which remind us that it